and welcome to this edition of Montgomery Talks. I'm Senior News Editor Doug Tallman at Montgomery Community Media, and we're talking today with Senator Will Smith, who's calling us in from his office in Annapolis. He represents District 20, which includes Tacoma Park, Silver Spring, White Oak, and Colesville. Welcome, Senator Smith.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, too. Your biography reveals a succession of promotions in the last 6 years or so that I think is remarkable. You were first elected to the House of Delegates in 2014, and then you moved to the Senate in 2016 to take the position formerly held by Jamie Raskin when Raskin was elected to the House of Representatives. And now the General Assembly is starting its 2020 session on January 8th, which, as we record this, would be next Wednesday, just a few days away. And if, as expected, Senator Bill Ferguson becomes the new Senate president, and Ferguson has said he will choose Smith to take over the leadership of the Judicial Proceedings Committee. That's the Senate committee that hears all the crime bills. So that seems like a remarkable trajectory for someone's career in the legislature.
I guess so. I remember I ran the campaign for Jamie Raskin, Henry Reserve, Sheila Hickson, and Tom Hucker in 2010, and that really got me interested in running for office myself. And when there were two vacancies during the 2014 election, I ran, and along with David Moon, we were elected along with Sheila Hickson. And when Jamie ran and won for Congress, that just opened up a spot, and then I stepped up and competed for that position. And once I got to the Senate, the thing is, it's just a much smaller body, and if you keep your head down, you work hard, and play nicely with others generally, and then you're in a prime position to get yourself promoted. And so, yes, when Bill Ferguson takes over on January 8th, when our session starts, he'll be the first new Senate president in 32 years. And so this change in leadership, not only his position, but then my position at Judicial Proceedings, and then also Guy Gazzoni at the Budget and Tax, really does mark a generational and an ideological shift within the Senate, the likes of which we haven't seen in over 30 years. You got to remember, Senator Miller is the only senator that was a senator before he was Senate president. So I think we were doing the calculations the other day, and I think 174 senators have served under President Miller. So wow. That's like, a 3-time turnover of every senator almost for his tenure. So it's a really remarkable tenure that's coming to an end in January.
Wow. And he will remain a senator for the rest of his term, or at least that's his plan. He's not stepping down from the presidency, but he's not stepping down from representing, District 27, I believe, correct?
That's right. So he's going to be a senator, and he's going to serve out the end of his term, obviously, because he took a step back to fight his cancer, right. Just not having the energy and level of resources, and then he needs to channel his energy toward fighting cancer. So he's going to be doing that, but still serving the body. He'll be on the Budget and Tax Committee, and I think that's a great value add for all of us. As he's handed over the reins to Bill Ferguson, we'll still have the benefit of his expertise and his experience in the body, and so I think it's a great thing. Okay,
and I can imagine that being very difficult, especially for someone as young as Bill Ferguson and someone as experienced as Mike Miller sitting down in the Senate chamber. I don't envy Mr. Ferguson. I believe that, but that's why that's where he is, and I'm not. So,
well, it's an enviable task for anyone, but he likens it to no one remembers who replaced Cal Ripken at shortstop. So
Ryan Miner.
It's kind of like it's kind of like having Cal Ripken still on the field,
right?
Saying, hey, you should have done this a little this way, a little that way.
Right.
It'll be an interesting situation, but Bill's definitely the right man for the job. He's got the right temperament, and he's a smart guy.
Okay. Before we start talking local politics, I did want to talk on your military service.
Sure.
You left for Afghanistan before the end of the 2019 session, and you spent about 6 months there, correct?
That's right. So I left, about 2 weeks before the end of session, and then it was basically a 7-month deployment, but mostly in Kabul and a little bit in Doha, in Qatar, monitoring some of the peace talks that were going on between the Taliban and the U.S. government. Okay.
And you served as an intelligence officer, correct?
That's right. So as I'm a Navy reservist, and we're individual augmentees. We deploy not as a unit, but individually, and we get attached to a unit. I was attached to an Army unit, the First Armored Division, rather, out of Texas. So I served as branch chief for governance and ANDSF, which is the Afghan National Security Defense Force. And so my job essentially entailed monitoring developments within the election, and then also with the Defense Force, and reporting it back to the senior intel officers in my unit. In this case, it was the head of the Combined Joint Intelligence Operations Center, and then also General Miller, who is the commander of our forces in Afghanistan.
So is there anything you could say about your service that, we've been fighting in Afghanistan for so many years. Is there anything you saw that would make you think that that this is a noble cause, or is this something that we should be trying to extricate ourselves from?
Well, I'll say first that it was a remarkable time to be over there, and a historic time to be over there. It was during their election. It was only the 4th time that they've held a presidential election in their fragile and fledgling democracy. So that was fascinating to observe and to assist with. People literally risked their lives to go vote, and that was an inspiring thing to witness and participate in, especially when you compare it to making sure that we get folks out here to vote and get access to vote. It starts to put the importance of civic participation in a different perspective when you view it through that lens. But I'll say that, despite what was published in the Afghan papers in the Washington Post this last month, which I think was much needed and shed some much needed light on the situation there that every taxpayer should be aware of, every American should be aware of. There are some really, really inspiring and good things that are happening over there. For instance, the parliament in Afghanistan is comprised of 1/3 women, which is something that's mandated by the constitution, but still it still happens. You have a constitution there that is more protective of religious and ethnic minorities than ever before. It operates under the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. And like I said, you just had an election, which is the 4th successful, I'd say, democratic exercise of a presidential election. And then, frankly speaking, and most important to every American, is that Afghanistan hasn't been used as a staging ground for another terrorist attack on domestic soil. So, by those metrics, there's been some significant progress. The question then becomes, what is our level of sustainment, and how long are we going to have to stay there to ensure that the progress continues and that we don't get attacked? When I left, the month I left, when I left in late October, early November, the first American soldier who was not alive during 9/11, September 11, 2001, arrived in Afghanistan. So it just shows you how long we've been there. We've been there for over 18 years now, and it's our longest war. And it's a question that every taxpayer, every voter, and every political and military leader are going to have to continue to ask is, whether we need to still have our level of sustainment there. We have 14,000 American troops over there at the moment. And so, me personally, I think that we could draw down and still have a counterterrorism platform. But it's going to take a lot of sacrifice and a lot of willpower and stepping up to the plate from the Afghans and the Afghan government. So we'll see.
Okay. We woke up this morning to the news that a U.S. drone strike had killed Iran's top security and intelligence officer in the wake of the attacks on the Baghdad embassy. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's funny. My first thoughts actually went to when I was in boot camp in Fort Jackson, getting ready to deploy. We trained with a lot of people that were going to the embassy and to Iraq. So my first thing was to reach out to them and see how they were doing. But look, it was obvious victory for us. The top general responsible for a lot of the strategy in Iran and obviously operated in Iraq, was responsible for the deaths of dozens of American allies and soldiers. So that's definitely a big victory for us. On the other hand, now we have to be in a more aggressive posture in terms of defense and seeing what type of retaliation the Iranians are seeking. So it escalates things, certainly. I remember when I was in Doha in Qatar, which is right off the Gulf and very close to Iran. They were on high alert because of the escalated tensions in the Gulf and the Straits of Hormuz. Having a drone strike, one of our drones struck down. That was at a heightened tension. So I can't even imagine what it must feel like there on the ground after something like this. But we shall see.
Okay, let's get back to Maryland. Now I'm hedging my bets here because I'm assuming you're going to become chairman of judicial proceedings, but it still has to be voted on by the full Senate, or Ferguson's vote still has to be voted by on the full Senate, but the Democrats have certainly enough votes to determine who's going to be the next Senate president. But assuming you're the judicial proceedings chair, how do you think the committee's going to change?
Well, the committee's going to change. And, I'm great friends with the current chairman, Bobby Zirkin, who announced his resignation, and from not only from the legislature, so he's obviously stepping down as chairman. But we're very different in terms of our philosophy and our ideological background and our approach. And so I think stylistically will be a little different, but then also in terms of policy, we're going to be very different. The composition of the committee is also very different. So we have a 7-4 majority Democrats on the committee. And if you look at the composition, Shelley Heddleman or John Cardin will come over to the committee from Baltimore County to replace Bobby Zirkin, both of whom are considerably more, I guess, liberal or progressive, if you're using those labels. And then we have Charles Sidnor, who's going to be on the committee. He's from Baltimore County, represents a little bit of Baltimore City. He is considerably more progressive than his predecessor, who was not on the committee. And then you have Ron Young. Jeff Wallstreicher is now the vice chair of that committee. So you've got a lot of really progressive folks, if you're going to use, again, those labels, on the committee. And then me swapping out for Senator Zirkin. So the slant is going to be a lot more progressive and just a different approach. Now, having said that, I think that one thing that I'd want to address is that this doesn't mean that everything is going to get through and that we're going to push everything that was bottled up. My number one goal is to set up a committee that runs smoothly, that has very clear policies in terms of how it's going to operate, and so that it maximizes everyone's talents, including the council here that work here, so that we produce the best policy possible, and the best, policy for Maryland. So the standard, we deal with all things from judicial proceedings to murder, rape, property, traffic. We deal with so much stuff. It's so important that I want to remind folks that are listening that our committee really can't afford to be partisan. We have to focus on the merits of the issue and try to get it right. So that's going to be my focus, is to ensure that we put out quality products and that we set up a set of systems that ensure that we have the best chance to do that.
Okay. Well, I mean, you touched on something that I wanted to ask you about, because for many years, the two crime committees, your committee and the House Judiciary Committee, were led by chairmen who were probably considered more conservative Democrats. And I'm thinking of Delegate Valerio and Walter Baker, who goes back many, many years. Baker, of course, was
Brian Frosch.
Right, yeah. and then of course Brian Frosch, who I don't know that he would consider himself conservative, but because of the nature of the Senate, it seemed like a lot of bills it seemed like lots of crime-related bills would get bottled up, and it would be very hard to get them to pass. And people would say that's a good thing, because you don't want emotion to make a decision on certain issues. However, I think a number of advocates would probably take the contrary position on whatever it is they're fighting for, whether it's domestic violence or gun control or whatever, and say, look, we need to do something. So Now the two committees, you and Luke Clippinger, who is the chairman of House Judiciary, are both fairly progressive folks. And my guess is you probably agree on lots of issues. So it would probably be a lot easier for your committees to present to the floors of your chambers issues that may not have been so easily passed in previous years. Is that a fair assessment?
That's certainly true. And to add to that, we actually have a really good relationship. The chairs of the respective bodies haven't necessarily had the best working relationships, and Luke and I have a very good working relationship. We meet all the time. In fact, we're going to meet later today to discuss some of the ways we're going to move forward and some of the issues we're planning to push next year. So it's certainly a fair assessment. And in terms of where we are today, look, we're in a new year, 2020. The end of year reports come out, and lots of statistics start being thrown across the newspapers. Baltimore City had 348 homicides. It was the second deadliest year on record there, and it's the fifth consecutive year with over 300 homicides. Baltimore County, for instance.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want our listeners to make sure that statistic kind of got bubbled in the cell coverage. You said 348 murders in Baltimore City. Homicides
in Baltimore City.
In Baltimore City.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's the second deadliest, on record in Baltimore City. Okay. Baltimore County, for instance, their homicide rate jumped 52% in 2019. So we're going to see a huge focus or refocus again on combating violent crime in the city, and to a lesser extent, Baltimore County. And the temptation and I think the pressure will be to jack up sentences, maybe even mandatory minimums, and to go with a more harsh, heavy hand on some of these sentences. The governor has already indicated as such with his crime package that he's planning to introduce or reintroduce this year. And I remember the debate was hot and heavy, and I voted for a bill that would have given some discretionary enhancements to people that were convicted of a violent crime on the third time. But the bill also had various and sundry funding mechanisms, Safe Streets, and we're talking millions of dollars for Safe Streets and other community programs and initiatives that would help reduce recidivism rates and then keep people out of the criminal justice system in the first place. That bill didn't pass, and for various reasons. But this year, I'm committed to rebuffing any efforts to significantly enhance sentencing and to incorporate any new mandatory minimums into our code, because it simply doesn't work, and it doesn't make us safer, and it doesn't drive down recidivism. One of the big lessons I learned, everyone, was the sensational book, The New Jim Crow, comes out, Michelle Alexander, this is 6-7 years ago. Well, I think a little less known book, it's called Locking Up Our Own, Crime and Punishment in Black America, and it was James Furman Jr. He wrote this book. He's a Yale law professor, and at the end of, not last session, but the session before, he sent that book to several members of the judicial committees here in Maryland. Well, I got it, and I came to the office, and I read it, and I started reading it. I read the whole book in one night. I just couldn't put it down. I called him up, and he happened to be in Baltimore the next month, and so we sat down and had a long lunch and discussed a lot of what was in the book. The book revealed, it was a history. He was a prosecutor in Washington, D.C., and he basically chronicled how African-American politicians in particular were really keen on harsher sentences, mandatory minimums, and going after drug crimes. And so obviously I think we've done a great job with decriminalizing drugs and moving away from those harsh sentences. I think now our focus is more difficult because it's violent crime, and it's more difficult politically to have that discussion with people that says, hey, look, maybe the longer sentences for emerging adults, people that are 20 to 24, is not the way to go. Maybe we need to invest a little bit more on training, vocational training, academic training, community programs, things that won't bear fruit for several years. It's not an immediate gratification type of thing, but it's politically, I think, the most expedient and the best investment we can make to drive down recidivism and to invest in our communities, but it's not politically expedient. And so that's going to be the next struggle, I think, when the governor comes down with this crime bill. There's going to be a lot of media attention and a lot of focus and a lot of pressure to do something right now. And the problem is a lot of the most important things you can do and the most effective things we can do are long-term investments. And those things take time, and you're not going to have immediate gratification for the political cycle. And frankly, I'm not interested in this immediate gratification. I'm interested in a long-term structural change that's going to make a difference for communities of color, for all of our communities, frankly. But because communities of color are disproportionately affected here, it's significant. And I know I'm going on, but another thing that this dovetails well with the Justice Policy Institute, they just released a report in November. And I remember reading this report because I was on my way back in the Warrior Transition Program in Germany, getting back online, trying to read as much as I can to get sped up for coming back here. And they released a report that was damning. It shows that Maryland's incarceration rate for African Americans, especially young African Americans, but is the highest in the nation. We're ahead of the next closest state, which is Mississippi, which means that we lock up more African Americans than any other state in the country, percentage-wise. And it's a new person coming in to the Judicial Proceedings Committee. This is something that, if this isn't top of mind, and this isn't something that you're interested in addressing head on, I don't know what is. So that's a theme that I'm definitely going to address this year, coming into the sessions. So how to combat violent crime and how to address our racial disparities in incarceration in Maryland, so that we're not the worst in the country, are two things that I'm definitely focused on.
I just want to back up a second. The name of that book you mentioned before was what?
It's called Locking Up Our Own. It's by James Furman Jr. and he's a Yale law professor. It came out probably 3 years ago at this point.
3 years ago.
It's called Locking Up Our Own. It's a great book that kind of, I think, finishes what the Michelle Alexander, the New Jim Crow kind of starts, and it puts this in a new perspective and adds a little bit of flavor to it. And he's critical and harsh with some of the some folks that we would deem as civil rights and political giants in the African American community. Eric Holder. I mean, he's fair in his treatment of Eric Holder and his record when he was in the Justice Department. It was really revealing and enlightening. So, highly recommend your listeners pick that book up if they have a chance.
Well, because I work in a newsroom, this is an issue that I think about often, and that's what happened at the Annapolis Capitol offices. Been 18 months ago, I guess, but we're coming up on. I know that there was some effort to try to plug a couple of loopholes in our gun legislation that the man accused of that shooting apparently capitalized on. Do you see any kind of action on that in this session?
Yes, and some other top priority of mine is for a couple of reasons. One is that bill languished in our committee, and the delays for various reasons made it impossible for it to get voted on in time to get passed onto the floor to give it a fighting chance. So Senator Susan Lee has a bill that will essentially expand background checks for long guns. Right now, you have just the regulated firearms are required for a NICS background check, which is a national database that's maintained by the FBI and Homeland Security. So this bill would essentially ensure that long guns, people that are transferring long guns to a friend or selling their long gun, that person in receipt of that has to go through a background check before they take it. So, for instance, today in Maryland, if I have a long gun, I can pull on the side of the road, and you can meet me, and you can give me $300, and I'll give you my gun, and no one's required to undergo a background check, and that's over. It's done. The transaction's finished. This bill seeks to close that loophole, and that's a loophole that the shooter in the Capitol Gazette and several others have used to circumvent background checks and go on to commit some pretty heinous crimes. So that will be top of mind. That's our number one gun sense legislation for this year, for 2020. That's my number one promise and priority, to get that out of this committee on time for a fair vote on the floor.
I mean, that's exactly the role of the chairman of any committee, is to get legislation out. Kill the legislation that you want killed, and then get the legislation that you want out.
That's right. So I mean, but again, I go back to the standard. Not interested in popping things out just to pop them out and to satiate or to appease interest groups, right, and advocates. Interested in producing quality legislation that's going to address real problems in Maryland. I mean, everyone, to his credit, there were a couple of, when I was on Joe Valerio's committee, when I was in the House, I don't think that there are lots of good things. There are lots of examples, good examples of bad examples, but there are lots of really good examples and sage advice that he was able to dispense that I was able to pick up from him. One is, every piece of legislation should at least undergo this three-part test. Is, what's the problem it's trying to solve? Does the legislation solve that problem? And then what are the unintended consequences? If you view things through those lines, that just like the bare minimum of what those three kind of criteria are to get through, and you ensure that it's a tight piece of legislation that actually does what it's supposed to do, it fits into the code, and that there aren't any strange or peculiar unintended consequences, I think that's the job of a chairman, to ensure that quality gets out. So again, there will be immense pressure from interest groups, left and right, advocates from the left and the right, to just pop things out. But again, I'm not interested in just popping things up. I'm interested in popping up quality legislation that's going to address real problems and help Marylanders. So that's the tone that we're looking to set in 2020.
Well, thank you, Senator. I appreciate this conversation. I've learned a lot about what we can expect in our 2020 session, which starts January 8th, and then it'll end, I guess, with the first week in April. So best of luck to you, sir.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. It's been a real pleasure and honor.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it. All right. This has been Montgomery Talks. I'm Doug Tallman, Senior News Editor at Montgomery Community Media. Our engineer today has been Adam Wyatt. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.